The story begins at the estate of the great Duke Crichton. It was already nighttime, and the sky was lit by stars. The protagonist came to the Duke's house and knocked, addressing him. After that, she added to his lordship that she was entering to see him. After entering, she informed the man that the private mercenary Mirabelle was at his service. The man who was sitting at the table started to say that her fame was ahead of her. As far as he knew on missions, the girl doesn't tolerate any failure. He further added that although she doesn't usually take such orders, but this is very important to him. That was why he was asking for her help. At that, he took out a picture and showed it to the girl. The heroine immediately took it in her hands and began to look at it closely. The man who was in the photo was quite familiar to her. The man kept saying that the girl needed to find his daughter, whose name was Cornelia. The girl wondered if this was all serious because it was a rather strange assignment. Also, now she realized that the Duke probably really doesn't know anything. Cornelia Crichton was the mother of the protagonist. The girl hadn't heard that name in years. It was after she ran away from home in pursuit of love. After that, her mother often apologized, sent letters to her family, even during her illness, from which she later passed away. But still, there was never any response from the family. Now the heroine wondered if after that, he had decided to find his daughter after all. Next, she asked the man if he wanted in a general search. The Duke inquired in surprise as to what she was talking about. The girl further asked why the man never answered the letters she sent. But the man again stated what she was talking about, since she had never sent anything. After a moment, the protagonist said that she was sorry, but Cornelia Crichton had long been dead. This statement really dumbfounded the man. The heroine continued her story, saying that for years the woman had been sending letters asking for forgiveness. And in the end, she died without ever receiving a reply. The Duke began to shake because of this information, and he asked what she was saying and whether Cornelia was really dead. Suddenly, someone entered the very office where they were talking. The man wondered who the people were. A man wearing a hat entered the room. As he approached the protagonist and the man, he stated that they had finally met after all. The Duke realized after a while that he knew the man. He inquired of Daniel as to what he was doing here. The same man, lighting a cigar, stated that he believed they had not properly introduced themselves to each other. He then continued his speech, saying that she was the Duke's granddaughter. He then asked his brother if he would like to hug her. The Duke immediately asked what he was talking about and what other granddaughter. After receiving all this information, the protagonist asked who the man was. The man immediately began to say that he is her great-uncle. He asked where they stopped in their conversation and if they had told her about Cornelia's letters. The heroine was even more shocked because of this. She used to wonder how on earth this man knew about all those letters, to which the man laughed and stated that he had been intercepting them, just to make sure that her brother wouldn't forgive the woman. Otherwise, if he did, it would ruin the man's plan. The heroine immediately thought, it turns out the Duke wasn't ignoring her mother's letters. He just wasn't receiving them. Because of this, the heroine got angry and asked the man why on earth he was only telling everyone about it now, then decided that no matter what his reason was, she would never forgive him. At that, she reached into her pocket to pull out a knife. Daniel immediately stated that he did it all to take their lives. At this time, his men appeared near the man with weapons. Duke stood behind, and the protagonist in front of him with the knife. Next, the Duke's brother stated to the lovely Mirabelle that it was not worth resisting. After all, she should just accept her fate, and then it will be much easier for her. His lordship turned to the heroine and shouted that she should run away soon, because it is not necessary to fight for him. But immediately the girl turned to him. Next, the heroine asked if he loved her mother. The man immediately said that she was just everything to him, and he never held a grudge against her. When the girl cried out and said that was enough for her, she then took her knife and rushed to attack her opponent. But her attack was not successful, for there were many more opponents than she. One of the attacking men then swung his sword and declared that she should die. In the next moments, the man attacked the girl. It was at that moment that the protagonist realized that this was her end. After all, she shifted her gaze to her body and noticed that the opponent's sword had stabbed her in the stomach. Then the wound was very deep and fatal to her life. The girl saw only Daniel in front of her and realized that she had never been able to avenge her mother. A few moments later, the girl fell dead. The last words she said were about her mother, Her body was so heavy at that moment, as if she was drowning. The heroine knew that she was never afraid of death, but at that moment, she was afraid of not avenging her mother. At the last moment of her life, she thought that here you have given her another chance. When the girl was as if in a delirium, she heard someone calling her by name. When she woke up, she noticed that there was some rather familiar face in front of her. After a moment, she noticed that her mom was in front of her. Her face was exactly the same as hers. The protagonist immediately caught up and hugged the woman in front of her. She further inquired if it was really her now. This was the kind of question her mother was surprised by, and asked if anything had happened to her. She wondered if perhaps the girl just had a nightmare, and that was about it. The girl continued to hug her mom, and the woman asked if she was okay, to which the crying girl immediately stated that she was fine. Right off the bat, the heroine thought that everyone was pretty familiar, but something was wrong. Just as she did, she looked at her hand. Because of what she saw, she was a little shocked. At the same time, she thought whether her palms had always been so small as they are now. The heroine didn't realize what had happened, and a cold sweat ran down her body. After that, she wondered what was wrong with her right now after all. After a moment, she told her mom to give her a second. The girl's face was completely terrified, and that scared her mom. The heroine immediately turned around and walked to the side. She walked over to the mirror and looked at her reflection. There she saw that she was no longer a grown woman, but a little girl. At that, she thought that this simply could not be. After a moment, she turned to her mother and asked how old she was now. Again, such a woman was horrified by such questioning and wondered if her child was all right. Further, she stated what she was talking about. After all, she only turned 9 years old yesterday. The protagonist from such an answer was horrified and wondered what was going on. A small amount of time passed, and the girl finally calmed down a little. Her mother fed her lunch, and the girl sat at the table. At the same time, the heroine thought about what generally happened to her. First of all, it turned out that she did die. But literally, for some unknown reason, the girl returned to the body of her 9-year-old self. At the same time, her mother was still alive. Now the protagonist did not understand what or who sent her to the past. But it was not particularly important to her, because the main thing is that she was now given another chance. First, she needed to find medicine to cure her own mother. There were only a few months left before she would die. Still, the heroine remembered that was just fine. In her previous life, she had to watch her die, and she ended up not being able to do anything about it. But that's not the case this time, and she wants it to be very different. There's also something else. At this time, the desire to avenge her mom burned even more in the girl. But literally, now her goal has changed a bit. For she remembered the man who had spoken sincerely when he asked her to find his daughter. If you thought hard enough, you could realize that the 3 of them had been victimized. All of them had been deceived by this very man and the Duke's brother, whose name was Daniel. Sitting at the table and eating her food, the girl strictly decided that it was time to get together. Also, she wanted as a consequence of her actions to change into the future, so that it would not be so bitter. Now the main goal of the heroine, to cure her mother and do justice to Daniel. And this all means that she Burava to meet with the Duke himself. The girl immediately asked her mom if she is busy today. She said no, she planned to stay home. Next, the girl asked the woman about the fact that she had told her that she had a grandfather. The mom sighed very sadly and stated that that was the way things were. The same little girl approached her and asked if they could meet him today. The little girl held the woman's hand and there looked at her daughter carefully. After a while, she stated that she thought it was simply impossible, all because she had done something that he could never forgive her for. A small amount of time passed, and the protagonist in a cloak was making her way somewhere. At the same time, she thought that if her mother could not walk with her, then the girl should meet him herself. After all, she has a schedule of caravans and going to the capital. All she has to do is just take it and slip there unnoticed. The heroine remembered that after her mom's death, she had to live on the streets, begging and avoiding other homeless people. Moving around unnoticed, it wasn't that hard for her. Next, the little girl decided that it would never happen again. After a while, she saw the caravan, Without thinking long, she decided that she could hide there. She then climbed into one of the carriages, figuring she would just throw a cloth over herself, and everything would be fine. Suddenly, she heard someone saying, "We should check the caravan before we set off." A small amount of time passed, and the girl was happy from the fact that the inspectors did not notice her. Suddenly, the heroine felt that there seemed to be something alive there. She thought perhaps it was a rat. Or what was that rustling noise? Suddenly, someone approached her with quiet steps. That person then immediately inquired about who was there. Because of that, the protagonist raised her head and looked at that person. After a moment, she saw who it was and was shocked. This person she had never seen before and immediately asked who he was. Just ahead of where the girl had heard footsteps, there was a boy sitting in front of her. He had white hair and rather large blue eyes. The heroine wondered what else it was, but it seemed he was also here hiding with her. Next, with a haughty face, the girl stated that before asking a person who they should first introduce themselves. The guy immediately looked her over, scrutinizing who she was. Immediately he realized it was some girl and introduced himself, informing her that his name was Jeffrey Coleman. The heroine immediately wondered if this was the same Jeffrey Coleman she knew from a past life. As the girl remembered from her past life, this man was the most famous mercenary on the continent. It was said that he was the one who had even founded his own squad, and he was at the level of the Order of Ryan of the Royal Knights. And to top it all off, because of his own influence, he received his title as the King of Mercenaries. It turns out that he was not only strong, but also cared for others. To all of this, he was also famous for his reliability. After all, the girl remembered that together with him, she had also fought before. At the very time when the heroine was a mercenary, this guy really wanted her to join his squad. It was then that the guy kept asking if she wanted to join them. Right now, the girl was realizing with a smile on her face that she now recognized his face. The guy, looking at her, wondered if she now wanted to say her name. He was also quite taken aback, wondering why she was sitting in front of him and laughing. Immediately after these words, the heroine immediately came to her senses and realized that she had to answer something. Immediately, she stated that her name was Mirabelle Hale. She remembered that this name was given to her by her parents. To all of this, it fit her perfectly. The heroine thought about her parents for a while. The boy said her name again, and then added that it was pretty. Then he continued to stare at the girl, admiring her. The main character went to hear the words, first a little surprised, and then smiled very nicely at the guy. At the same time added that she agreed with his statements. After a while, the guy asked why she was hiding here. But the heroine herself thought that she should ask him, as the future king of mercenaries. And she told the guy that she needed to go to the capital, but the family did not have a free carriage. After that, she also asked the guy what about him. The one stated that he was simply being chased by the guards. The heroine was surprised by this, and she asked what it was and how such a small boy could be chased by guards. These words surprised Jeffrey a little. He started to say what kind of little boy if the girl is obviously younger than him. The heroine thought that indeed, Jeffrey is 2 years older than her. After all, she had forgotten that she is no longer 26 years old. Afterwards, she turned to the guy and asked him to forgive her, and she takes back her words. The kid with a satisfied face stated that he forgives her. After that, he immediately smiled and said that there was actually something else going on. It just so happened that he had killed someone. There was a man whose name was Guyman, and he was from the Sharon Manor. He went on to say that his parents had borrowed money from him, and it so happened that they couldn't pay it back, which caused him to beat them literally to death. The kid immediately went and told the guards about what the man had done, but they literally blamed his parents, saying they shouldn't have borrowed money from that man in the first place. The guy then progressed through the streets of the same city. As he did so, he wondered if that man had told all the guards about him. Suddenly, he was approached by that very man. Immediately to him, he said that he took pity on his little ass, and it turns out that this is what he paid him with. Next, the man took the boy by the hair and told him that perhaps he should join his parents. After all this, the boy remarked that he had taken matters into his own hands because of this. The protagonist listened attentively to the story of the boy in front of him. Because of this, quite a lot worried. Further, he turned to him and apologized for the fact that, probably, for him it is quite a sore subject. But the boy, with pride on his face, continued to say that there was nothing wrong with it. After all, he had taken revenge on that man. The boy asked if perhaps now she would tell him why she was going to the capital. After all, he had told her. The heroine said that she wanted to meet with her mom's father, but really without her. The boy wondered if this means that she should meet with her grandfather. Then he wondered if her mom knew about all this, to which the heroine said that naturally she did not know, because she did not ask her permission. Jeffrey immediately shouted out what else it was, for he wondered if she realized how worried the woman would be about it. He further yelled that she was urgently going back to her place. The protagonist immediately smiled at that and thought that he was absolutely right. Next, she looked back, but the option was gone. She remarked to the kid that she would definitely be worried, but the girl remembered what had happened in her past life and thought that she couldn't lose it a second time. After all, she can't just let a woman go. Next, she uttered the phrase that she knew what she herself was doing. Jeffrey wondered if it was really that important. In what the girl with a pretty face said that of course, it is very important. After all, it turns out that this is a very important task for her. The guy looked at such a cute face of the girl in front of him. Then he came to his senses and said that then it shouldn't be a big deal. He just hoped that she would make it to the capital in one piece. The girl remarked that she hoped so too. She further thanked the guy for his understanding. She added that he was probably just worried about her. She took her hand and put it on the boy's head, running it through his hair. The kid was surprised by this and asked her to stop doing that. Jeffrey, from such actions of the main character, was very shy and immediately blushed. At the same time, he asked Mirabelle to stop. Suddenly, the boy's stomach rumbled very strongly, saying that he wants to eat. The heroine asked if he was hungry, but the one replied that naturally not, and it's just, probably, the knee creaked. The girl was glad that at least they had not been found, and thought that the boy must have been hungry all this time. She looked to her purse afterward and thought she had some food. Still, she wanted to save it for the road, she thought. After a moment, she decided after all that the kid cared more about her right now. Next turned to Jeffrey and motioned for him to take her. The boy couldn't believe his eyes and stared intently at the food. Then he asked how the girl would be without food. But the heroine told him not to worry, because she took 3 more of them. She asked him not to worry, because they still have a long way to go. The heroine looked at the guy who was sitting with food and immediately thought, so it turns out that if still the future does not change, then he will become a successful mercenary. But then it means that he will not sleep at night, and because of this will be hungry. So the girl wondered if it would be best if he ate and slept now. At the moment when she was thinking about all this, she heard that the guy in front of her was crying. Immediately, she looked up and saw tears in the boy's eyes as he looked at the food. The guy sat there and thanked the girl for what she had done. He went on to do this several times, and it was so sincere that the girl felt sorry for him. After a while, Jeffrey calmed down a bit and promised that he would repay her for those potatoes. The main character said that it was just a potato and should not be so worried about it, but the kid noticed that it's not like that. Now she has to realize that his parents had to borrow money from Gaiman just because the guy was always complaining about hunger. Then, the future king of the mercenary U reached out to the heroine, declared to her that this was why he no longer wanted to be in debt for food, even if it cost him his life. The main character immediately put her hand on his arm and continued to listen. Jeffrey kept saying that he would have starved to death if it wasn't for the girl. After listening to all these words, the heroine immediately smiled and said that everything is fine then. And it turns out that she hopes in the future the one will repay her even doubly. Now her interlocutor also has a bright smile on his face. And as a result of that, he promised that he would try to do so. 3 days had passed since he had not boarded the caravan. Just about that day, they had already arrived in the city, and the caravan had stopped. The partner got out first and helped the girl, letting her know that they had arrived and needed to go. The kids immediately afterward began to run away from the caravan very quickly. After a few blocks, the heroine muttered that she was thinking that it was already possible not to run after all. The guy excitedly added that they really have reached the capital. Next, he thanked the girl for everything she had done for him. He also asked that the girl promise, after meeting her grandfather, that she would come home. After all, her mom must be terribly worried. The heroine approached the boy again and declared that he was a good boy, stroking him on the head, at the same time adding that it was all the same to him. After that, with a smile on her face, she stated for him to take care of himself. After all, the protagonist still hoped that they would meet again someday. Suddenly, Jeffrey stopped Mirabelle and shouted that he was really paying her back for the potatoes. At that, he kept his hand over his heart and stated that she was just waiting for it. The girl smiled sweetly at the guy because of this. At the same time, she added that she understood everything and that he did not forget the sheet potatoes, which she shared with him. The one, in turn, stated that, naturally, he would not forget it. The sun that day was very blinding to the girl. She reflected that she didn't know when or how, but she was pretty sure she would meet him again someday. And if so, then everything means that she should definitely do what she came for. Just like that, the girl approached the Duke's manor. She then approached the guard that stood at the entrance. She told him that she would like to ask for a meeting with Grand Duke Keaton. The guard was quite surprised because of such words. He looked at the girl, and she was all quite dirty. At that, he asked that she was probably here to see Lord Crichton, then stated that it was pointless to ask that, but he still wondered what noble house she came from. The heroine told him that she wasn't from any noble house, but she still needed to meet him very badly. But the guard apologized to the little girl and said that his lordship is very busy with state affairs. And it turns out that she needs to make an appointment in advance. Suddenly, the guard's conversation was interrupted by a man who was saying if there was any problem. Hearing the man's voice behind her back, the girl realized that it was a rather familiar voice. The guard immediately told my Lord Crichton that there was no problem. It just turns out that this child said she wanted to meet him. Because of that, he was just about to send her back. The Duke, because of this, stated that he understood and added that it was a fine job. After that, he immediately turned around to leave. The heroine noticed this and immediately shouted Cornelia Crichton's name. The girl thought that her mom urgently needed help, and she just didn't have time to explain everything. She further stated that her mom's name is Cornelia Crichton, and she urgently needs his help. The grandfather of the main character was very much interested in these words. He asked the girl, naming her children, whether he knows at least whose name he just pronounced. To what the heroine immediately stated that he knows everything about us. The girl then added that she knows everything because the woman is the missing daughter of his lordship. Continuing her story, said that her mother told her everything, and the man can meet her himself if he does not believe the girl. Pronouncing all these words, the heroine immediately cried. Further continued her story that her mother lives in the village of Delphia. From all this, it seems that they can get there in just 3 days by wagon. But there was no time now, and they must hurry, for her mother was now very ill. The girl tried to wipe away her tears, but they literally did not stop and flowed in streams. The Duke listened attentively to the girl's story without interrupting her. The words of the little girl struck the man very much because he could not believe his ears. The main character continued to beg him to help him with tears in her eyes. At the same time, in her head was spinning the thought that she thought she would not cry, but still, the thought of losing her again made the tears flow in streams. Now the heroine is ready for anything, and she will kneel and even beg if it is necessary. While the girl was thinking about all this, then the Duke approached her. He immediately put his hand on her head while trying to calm the child. The heroine immediately raised her head upwards because of such actions. In front of her was the Duke, who crouched down on one knee. He further stated that they would not keep her mother waiting then. Immediately after that, he rose up and turned to his subordinates. And to them he stated that he wanted to find out if this girl was telling the truth and asked that you change his schedule. The subordinate immediately noted that everything would be done and he would prepare a carriage at once. The Duke then turned to the girl, telling her that she must be tired of suffering, and it is necessary now for them to go. They will go to the village in the near future, as soon as they finish all the preparations. After all these words, the grandfather along with the girl went to his estate. There, A table was set up for them to eat and satiate their bodies. The table was completely covered with a variety of food, but the girl did not even want to eat anything. She looked rather depressed and sat thinking. Herzog noticed all this and then turned to the girl. He noted that he may seem insincere because he does not even know where his daughter is now, but still as a father, he has something to say to her. The girl immediately raised her head and began to listen. The man continued, telling her that all parents want their children to live happily, and he is completely sure that this is what her mom is praying for. The protagonist at this point thought he knew how she was feeling right now. She blamed herself for leaving her sick mother and enjoying such a sumptuous dinner here, but still looking at this man, she realized that he still didn't seem to believe her. He doesn't believe that really her mother is Cornelia Crichton. However, all of this was easily explainable. This has brought out a slew of people claiming to know where his missing daughter is. Each such false visit tore his heart literally apart. Now he was no longer able to fully trust people. However, the girl realized that all his words were completely sincere. The girl understood that her mother had given up the Duke and his house to be with her father. And yet the man prayed for her happiness. It turns out that all this time he has been praying for just that. Between musings, the girl did start to eat a little bit at a time. At the same time, she thought that indeed this man was right. After all, whatever it was, her mom wouldn't want her to come home, hungry and sick, and need to eat because of it. After a while, their meal was finally finished after all. Also finished all the preparations for sending to the village. At this time, the heroine along with the Duke were going inside the carriage. The man, like a gentleman, let the girl pass forward. He gave her a hand, helping her up to the carriage. The girl from this thanked his lordship. Next, they both went up inside and seated themselves against each other. The heroine thought that Grand Duke Crichton was much kinder than she had previously thought. But the bad thing was that he did not believe that Cornelia Crichton was her real mother. Even though she was, he still decided to go with the girl on a long journey to her village. The protagonist all her life has hated him. Now that she knows the truth, the hatred seems to have evaporated. Now the heroine even felt a little sorry for the man. After all, it so happened that he longed for his daughter all his life, and in the end, died on the same day when he learned of her death. Why the girl remembered that still earlier he had called her his children. The heroine, it was not so bad to hear from him. Because of all these words, she was even glad, and the carriage moved further and further away. After a short time on the road, night fell and their carriage stopped. They made a fire and sat down near it. The Duke talked to the girl, informing her that he would be very happy if she really turned out to be his granddaughter. Still, he is well aware that she heard the name somewhere and decided to take advantage of it. He also added that he still doesn't blame the girl. After all, he knew about it from the beginning, but he felt her desperation and sincere desire to help her mother. It's just that still the very name Cornelia hurts a man's heart very much. And it so happens that he has had this wound for years. None of this would have happened if he had at least listened to his daughter back then. He claimed that he simply had no one to blame but himself and his own greed. The girl understood that Duke Crichton was not giving details, but she still knew what he meant. His daughter Cornelia Crichton was engaged to the current emperor, James Bassett Castro. However, despite this, she had fallen in love with her personal guard, Gail Houston. In consequence of all this, she wished to annul her engagement to the emperor in order to marry Gail. But her wish was never approved. Because of all this, in despair, she ran away with her lover. The protagonist remembered that, unfortunately for her, her father died in a battle with a demon in the forest. It was because of this that the coma turned out to raise her alone. The saddest thing in this whole story was that, if not for Daniel's plotting, Mom's letters would have reached the Grand Duke. Then it turns out, then they would have met, and things would probably have been much better. The girl looked at her grandfather and saw that he was rather sad. Immediately, she tried to cheer him up somehow by putting her hand on his arm. This cheered the man up a little, and he smiled and thanked the girl. He also told her not to worry, for after all, the man would be happy to help her and her family. And all this he would do, even if the girl's mother was not his Cornelia. But the heroine knew that he was very much mistaken. After all, this woman is exactly the kind of woman he has been looking for all these years. Now it turns out that at last he will finally be able to see his favorite daughter. Then the same heroine wanted to say all these words, but still could not. After that very conversation, enough time passed, and their carriage arrived at the village. The girl led the man to the house and claimed it was him. Hertz looked at the house, wondering if he and his sick mother were really living here, in a ruined house, so alone. Literally in moments they entered the house. The girl immediately shouted to her mom that it was Mirabelle, and she was finally back again. Here her mom came out looking pretty bad. She had been coughing the whole time and was happy that her daughter had finally returned. Immediately she ran up to her daughter and hugged her tightly. The whole reverent encounter caused her mom to immediately cry. At this, she asked if hockey represented her daughter. How worried she was at this time after all. Next, the mom began to ask if she was okay and didn't accidentally hurt herself anywhere. The girl immediately apologized to her mom and asked her not to worry, as she was fine after all. The mom immediately stated that this was the most important thing and now also started smiling like her daughter. There was a calmness between them at this time, for at last they were reunited. The Duke looked at all this and scrutinized the girl's mother. Because of what he saw, his hands immediately shook, and he threw his cane on the floor. With all these actions, he attracted the attention of the main character's mom. He also asked if it was really his Cornelia. The woman at this time also began to look closely at the man, and he was quite familiar to her. Her father fell to his knees and asked his daughter if it was really her in front of him. Cornelia could not believe her eyes, because before her she saw her father, whom she had long tried to find and ask for forgiveness. The crying woman immediately ran up to her father. Then she immediately declared that it was she who was his Cornelia. The Duke, too, could not believe his eyes and his happiness. He also cried together with his daughter because it was quite a touching moment. After that, he recognized his daughter and hugged her tightly, calling her his child. Cornelia immediately apologized to her father for what she had done in the recent past. That whole situation made her feel so sorry and hurt. Then some time passed after their reunion. The man immediately asked why his daughter lived here, alone, her husband Gale. The mother of the main character immediately told that he died 4 years ago. All this happened because he was protecting the village from a demon. The man immediately took a deep breath and held his head. Seeing this, his daughter immediately apologized to her father, but he stated that it was not about that right now. It was just suffering alone in a place like this for so long. He went on to say that Mirabelle had told him that she was very ill. Now he wondered if this was all true. The woman lowered her gaze and only after a while stated that indeed it was true. The father declared that she should have come to him at once because of this. Next, he wanted to inquire as to why she did not come after all. But the protagonist entered the conversation and said that her mom wanted him to forgive her. Because of all this, she wrote him letters many times but never got a reply. Eventually, it turned out that she thought he was still resentful of her. It was because of all these factors that she couldn't come there. The Duke immediately asked if it was all true, and she described it to him because he had no idea. The protagonist thought it was all obvious. After all, Daniel had made sure that the man never received or saw those letters. Her father continued his speech about how they still had much to discuss. But first they should still return to the manor, because there they could discuss everything in peace. Because of the words she heard, the heroine was very happy. Continuing his speech, the man said that they should hurry up, because his daughter needs to be cured as soon as possible. She thanked her father in response and said that she would pack her things now. At the same time, she asked if he could wait for her for a while because of this. To which the father stated that he would ask someone to help and that his child should not be stressed about it. After that, the heroine's mother turned to Mirabelle and asked if she could come to her for a second. The girl immediately turned around and wondered what she wanted. The mom started to ask the girl. It turns out she brought her grandfather here because she was worried about her. She further called her a brave little girl and thanked her dear daughter. She also apologized for putting such an overwhelming burden on such a little babe, but then added that next time she should not do anything so dangerous. After all, it was her mom who should take care of her, not the other way around. She went on to say that nothing was more important to her than the safety of her own daughter. The heroine smiled because of this and stated that everything would be fine, and she understood. Next, I continued with the preparations for departure and getting the things from the house into the carriage. The Duke was standing outside and saw his daughter walking along with the baby girl. She had a box in her hands, and the man declared that she should have given everything to the footman. But Cornelia remarked that they were Gale's things, and she still wished to carry them herself. After all, it also turns out that they are not that heavy. The man stated that it would be like that then, if only she wanted it herself. In doing so, he hugged his daughter, who thanked him for these words. He further stated that a carriage was waiting for them right at the entrance of the village. The heroine immediately tried to get away from them, thinking that it was necessary to leave them alone. But the girl's mother immediately noticed all this. Next, she turned to Mirabel and stated that her hands are now fully occupied. It was because of this that she asked that the girl come up and take her grandfather's hand. The heroine immediately interrogated what she was saying. At the same time, the girl understood that her mother wants to with you. They did get close to the man after all, then decided that it was not that hard after all. After that, she approached her grandfather and asked him, Lordship, if he would give her a hand. To which the man immediately gave his hand, and they walked on together. Her mother remained a little behind, letting them pass on ahead. At this, she thought, whether to her daughter he was still your lordship. After a small amount of time, after all, they still reached the carriage. The man stated that he should have said so earlier, but he thanked Mirabel now. After all, if it were not for him, he would never have found his daughter Cornelia. At these words, the heroine declared that she did not deserve all this and called the man his lordship. After all, it turns out that if he had not trusted the girl, then all this would not have happened. The protagonist realized that from the very beginning, the great Duke Crichton did not believe that her mother would really be Cornelia Crichton. It turns out it was his kindness to a helpless peasant child that united them all. He kept kindness in his heart even after the loss of his daughter. The protagonist was sure he deserved better. For the next 3 days in the carriage, Mother and the Grand Duke told each other the story of what had happened to them over the years. Mother spoke of how much she loved her husband and why she had run away after all. Also by how she blamed herself for all those long years. For his part, the Grand Duke told of how he had realized many things. Selfishness and greed had driven his decisions, but he regretted it greatly. Although they lost each other for many years, the meeting was quite pleasant. Finally, after a short time on the road, the Duke's carriage arrived at his estate. Everyone was ready for the man to return with his daughter and with his granddaughter. The protagonist got out of the carriage and thought that now they would live here. She must cure her mother and change her future. The Grand Duke will take care of Mom's illness. She must deal with everything else. In fact, she thought she was the only extra here. Suddenly, some man came out to meet the Duke and immediately addressed his lordship. He, worried, asked if what was in the letter was all true. After all, it turned out that he had really found his daughter Cornelia. Then the man looked at the girl and realized that Cornelia was indeed her. Immediately, he ran up and wondered where she had been all this time and why she hadn't contacted him. He was very curious if the woman understood anything at all, as he had been worried all this time. The main character's mom had a smile on her face and apologized to him. The man was still glad she was back and talking about it. It was all that mattered to him, but he wondered what kind of child was next to her. Cornelia started to say that she and Guile had a daughter after all. After that, she asked her daughter to say hello. In doing so, she introduced the man and said that it was Uncle Brian, who is the Duke of House Crichton. The protagonist immediately obeyed and stated that her name was Mirabel. She also added that she was very happy to meet my lord. The man immediately put his hand on the girl's head and stroked while doing so, stating that it was just amazing because she looked so much like them. And the girl, he remarked that he was very pleased to finally meet her. From now on, the girl could just call him uncle. Further, the uncle told that he has a son about the same age as her. That's when he approached them. The man noticed this and asked his son Elliot to come over and say hello. The boy came over and said with a smile on his face that he was happy to meet his aunt. At this, he added that his name was Elliot Crichton. Next, the father introduced Mirabel, saying that she was his cousin and he should be polite to her. The boy, again, greeted her with a smile and said that his name was Elliot. At that, he added that he was quite pleased to meet her. The main character extended her hand in response to the boy and said that her name was Mirabelle. She also added that she was also very happy to meet them too. Both kids smiled sweetly to each other. The Duke immediately turned to them and wondered if perhaps they should go inside. After all, Cornelia and Mirabelle must be pretty tired from the road. The Duke then turned to the protagonist. He apologized to the children and said that she could not stay in Cornelia's room today. As it happened, he had told his subordinates to prepare a room for her, but it took longer than he thought. The heroine immediately stated that she didn't mind, addressing his lordship. After that, the daughter was approached by her mother and stated that we were tired after all. The girl remarked that she was still fine, since they could rest a bit now anyway. Mommy said that she did, and then they would just have to go inside. It was there that the mommy from sings the girl a lullaby. At this time, the heroine thought that maybe she was wrong about the Crichton house after all. After all such people there are much kinder than she had expected before. For a while, the protagonist and her mother had already been in the manor. Next, the Duke summoned a man who should cure her mom. Just at this time, he examined the woman. The man inquired as to what had happened to her, his daughter, after all. That man stated that she would need therapy and treatment for 3 months. The protagonist understood that the great Duke had summoned a high priest from the temple of Duana to treat her mother's ailments. The goddess Duana was the mother of all gods. The priests who serve her are endowed with the ability to heal people, but it turns out that even with an experienced high priest, it will take 3 months to heal her mom. On this occasion, the protagonist is quite worried. At the same time, thought whether her mom can fully recover after the expiration of this period. The Duke asked if his daughter would be able to heal completely in 3 months. The priest explained so that the man had no doubts. After 3 months of treatment, Lady Cornelia could expect a full recovery. But suddenly the man stated that, however, he would like to examine Miss Mirabelle as well. The mother of the protagonist immediately began to worry and wondered what he meant. The priest immediately began to explain that Lady Cornelia's illness is named Hazel. It is a genetic disease, and they can't definitively say if it is passed on to descendants. It is statistically, yes. Because of the words he heard, the Duke stated, could the priest then examine little Lady Mirabelle as well? The man stated that he would gladly do so. The heroine thought at the same time that in her past life she had not had any such strange diseases. The high priest asked the girl if he could take her hand. The heroine immediately stretched out her hand and gave it to the man. The man at the same time intently began to inquire whether the little girl had an ailment. In the process, the priest found something interesting. He said that fortunately Miss Mirabelle had no signs of the disease. On the contrary, she is endowed with the ability to use divine power. Because of this turn of events, everyone in the room was quite surprised. The man immediately turned to Miss Mirabelle and asked if she ever wanted to visit the temple. After all, she could use divine power after all. The heroine immediately started going over the thoughts in her head about whether she could really use the power after all. Something must have outchanged when she traveled back in time. After all, it just so happens that she had nothing like this before. Next, she asked the man if that meant she could heal people like he could. For perhaps then, even we can heal her mother's illness. The man stated that her mother's disease is quite rare and hard to cure. But still, he was sure that one day she too would be able to cure it with her own hands. The girl's heart beat with renewed hope. At the same time, she thought that if only this ability had appeared to her earlier, she would never have let her mother die so helplessly. Now the heroine firmly resolved that this time she would simply not let her die. To the priest, she declared to him that she would definitely visit him, while calling him a priesthood. That man smiled and informed her that it was fine. He would be waiting for her at the temple. After a while, all the family gathered around the table. The Duke said that thank goodness this disease was curable after all. Uncle Brian added that this was indeed a very good thing. At the same time, he said that it had taken them so long to go to breakfast that he was even starting to prepare for the worst. The mom of the main character immediately started saying that it's all thanks to her baby Belle. After all, If it were not for her after all, the woman would simply die soon. The heroine thought that all this is certainly good. But even more important was that why this boy who sits across from her stares at her like that. Uncle Brian's son was sitting there and really glared at the girl. The uncle turned to his niece. The girl asked him what he wanted. He in turn wanted to know how I was and how I slept last night. The heroine noticed that it was quite comfortable and thanked the man for this. He immediately smiled and remarked that it was just fine. Then he added that if there is still something not to like, he asked not to be shy and tell him about it. The heroine literally with a strained smile remarked that she would say everything, but at the same time thought that Brian's face made her feel uncomfortable quite a bit, and the protagonist had her own reasons for that. After all, from the past, she remembered that this man was known as the Iron Duke. He was callous and indifferent, but scarier was what the girl saw during the demon extermination expedition. There, she saw his bloodthirsty eyes. There was a cruelty that came from him at the very moment when he had dealt with all the demons. Then he asked if it was all of them, and asked to pave the way to the next target. All this horror the protagonist remembered literally perfectly. And that very Iron Duke too. That was exactly what she was worried about, sitting in front of him. Brian kept saying that this girl looked like Cornelia as a child and she was so pretty. It also turns out that she's very savvy, since she wandered all the way to the Crichton mansion on her own. The heroine wondered if he was praising her as if you were a chatty grandmother. The man went on to say that he wasn't just saying that because she was his niece. In fact, he would love to brag to the world about how incredible his niece is. Suddenly he turned to the girl again, and the girl looked up at him. There was some dark, strange aura emanating from the man at this moment. The uncle, with a saddened look, asked if it was hard for her to communicate with him like that. The heroine asked in surprise what it was hard he was talking about. But the man went on to say that nothing could be done about it, because she did not even know that she had an uncle. From that, it must be all so sudden and frightening for her. He went on to apologize and added that actually even the children in their neighborhood run away in fear when they see him. He's trying his best to be friendlier, but apparently it hasn't worked. Also asked that she just know that he really does want to be kind. The heroine was just remembering him from a past life, but stated to her uncle that he had nothing to apologize for with a smile, after adding that it's not about his face at all. After all, he just needs to work on his emotions a bit. At the same time, the heroine thought that she could almost imagine the neighborhood children screaming fear. The man asked if this was really serious, like this. The protagonist's mom added with a smile on her face that she always said he had a terribly blank expression on his face. Duke at the same time asked Brian to just not in front of the kids to figure it all out. His sweet Mirabelle had suffered enough already, after all, but the heroine thought at the time that it wasn't really her uncle's fault at all. His son at this time asked to say something to his father. He stated that his face just scared the Mirabelle and she lost her appetite because of it. The heroine thought that really at all it was true, but then she smiled and turned to her uncle and told him that she was really fine. She was just trying to get used to the place and would eventually get used to everything. The man remarked to his dear niece that she was the only one on his side and thanked her for that. He further added that if anyone threatens her, she should go to him right away and he will help. Then he again made a menacing face and said that he assured her his fate would then be worse than death. His son again stated to his father that again, one should not comfort someone with such a fearful face. The uncle then stated to his son Elliot that he was expecting him at practice today. The man, surprised, asked what he was talking about, since he thought she wasn't there today. But the man said that it turns out he was wrong. All these actions immediately made the heroine laugh. She thought that she is still not used to the local environment, but they all seem to be kind and caring people. After a while, the heroine was approached by the Duke and called her his favorite. She, in turn, asked what his lordship wanted. In her head, she thought that she could not get used to the fact that he calls her then beloved, then dear. After all, in her past lives, she had considered him her sworn enemy. The man asked if perhaps there was something she wanted and she needed to tell him. The heroine thoughtfully asked about what she wanted. The man went on to say that he had never had the opportunity to pamper his darling granddaughter. It turns out that he has missed out on a lot of things, so he doesn't know where to start. That's why he asks her to tell him what she dreams of after all. The girl thought that her mother's illness will soon pass, and it is too early to think about Daniel. But while she was thinking, nothing like that came to her mind. For a while she was swimming in her thoughts, wondering what she wanted. Suddenly a touch came to her. She remembered the boy she had traveled to the capital with. She thought it would be great if she could help Jeffrey. It just so happens that he's going to be a mercenary king on his own. But she doesn't want him to live it all out in this life either. Sitting at the table, the girl thought that if she helped him now, maybe he would repay the same to her in the future. The girl sat pensive, and the grandfather tried to reach out to Mirabelle. She realized that she hadn't responded for a long time and immediately apologized because of it. She went on to say that if one boy she had met on her way to the manor, they had been together with him for a short time, but still he hadn't gotten too close over the conversation. And now the heroine was telling her grandfather that he seemed to be haunted, and she wanted to ask if he could help this kid. The grandfather stated that he understood. At the same time, he asked if the girl knew his name. Well, or at least need any data that will help find him. The main character immediately stated that the boy's name was Jeffrey Coleman, who was from Charon. He is only a mere 2 years older than her. Also, this boy has silver hair and blue eyes. The Duke stated that it turns out that he is 2 years older than her means he is only 11 years old. It turns out that he is so young, and the man is sure that this is some kind of misunderstanding or misfortune. He further stated with a smile that he will look into it. If everything goes smoothly, they will stop looking for him. The heroine, with a happy smile on her face, immediately thanked his lordship. She thought thank goodness, for it would help Jeffrey a little, but definitely. Next, the man turned to Cornelia. He stated that they had received a letter from the emperor late last night. He has no idea how he found out about her return, but asks the girl to visit him soon. The protagonist's mom asked if it's about the emperor, then the latter is referring to James Bazette Castro. But she went on to say that of course she was, because she was the reason he had suffered a terrible humiliation. It so happened that she could not have foreseen all this. Next, the girl turned to her father and stated that she would like to visit him tomorrow. The man said that if she would allow it, he would let him know about it. Again, the woman apologized once more to her father for all the suffering she had caused him. Also asked her brother's forgiveness as well, for she was very sorry. The father said there was no need for that, for they were immensely glad that the girl had returned home safe and sound. The brother also said that it was just the way it was. If she wants, he will accompany her during her visit to the emperor. The protagonist's mother thanked them for the offer, but informed them that it should be just between the two of them. The protagonist looked at her mom's face and was pleased to see her smile again. At that, she gobbled some kind of candy and stated that it was quite tasty. She thought that this treat was completely different from the one she had eaten in her previous life. The mom asked her daughter if she really liked the egg tart, to which the little girl stated that she did indeed. The Duke immediately turned to his subordinates and asked if they had heard that. So it turns out that his granddaughter is demanding egg tarts. The subordinate said that he would not bring them all at one point. A few moments later, there was already a large number of these tarts in front of the protagonist. The girl turned to his lordship and stated that she shouldn't have done that. But then she saw that the grandfather was glowing with joy. The man asked if she would like more farthings, and he asked her to enjoy them. After that, he immediately told Mirabelle that if she still wanted anything, he would immediately give her everything. Next, the protagonist continued to enjoy these treats that she enjoyed. At the same time, she declared to everyone that this is just incredible deliciousness. Sometime after the feast, the heroine together with her mother returned to her room. Near her stood servants, who reported that they had prepared a dress specially for my lady. Next, the heroine along with her mother went to her room. The girl thought that dreams are becoming a reality. After all, it turns out that mom is alive. If she went back even further in the past, then perhaps she could save her father. Suddenly, the mom turned to the heroine, and the heroine asked what she wanted. Cornelia said that she was going to meet the emperor today and asked if her daughter would flatter her. The heroine stated that of course she would go. The woman went on to say that even though she told Brian that she would be okay, she was still a little scared. But now that the girl was around, she was much more at ease. The main character, in truth, already knew the answer to her own question. After all, She was too young that it was the right time when her father died to do anything about it. Now, however, she and her mother stood together in an embrace. The heroine turned to her mom and stated that she would always be there for her. The mom immediately thanked her little girl, and at the same time apologized for the fact that she could not do more for her. Natalia stated that from now on, her mom would take full care of her. Also, the protagonist at this moment thought that this is why she would do everything to protect her mother. After a short time, the protagonist, along with her mother, traveled by carriage to the emperor's palace. The moment they got out of the carriage and approached the palace, they were greeted. Cornelia immediately recognized the man and stated that she was very happy to see Tenarvan. In front of the man stood two beautifully dressed girls, mother and daughter. The man immediately approached and kissed the woman's hand in greeting. He stated that he had received news of her return, and now he was curious as to how she was doing. Cornelia remarked that not bad at all, and thanked him for his concern. It also seems in her absence the man had been promoted. He remarked that this was the case. He is now in command of the royal guard. He further requested that she let him escort her to the emperor. It turns out that His Majesty is waiting at his house. Just then, the emperor looked out of his window at the carriage on which Cornelia had reached with her daughter. After a while, they all went up to the emperor's chambers. A servant turned to His Majesty and announced that Cornelia Crichton had come to see him. The emperor immediately declared that they would let her in. The protagonist looked at her mother and wondered if she was all right now. Immediately, the moment the girls left to go to him, the emperor stood with his back to them. He was looking out the window while waiting for his guests. A few moments later, the protagonist, along with her mother, ducked to the emperor and greeted him. He, in turn, turned around to greet them in return. Thalia the man turned to Cornelia and stated that she was late. After all, he was still there in Vanessa's garden. After all, it turns out that he was expecting her then and is expecting her now. Next, His Majesty was on his way to the guests and asked if the woman could not visit him at least once. The protagonist immediately thought that this turns out to be the same emperor who fell in love with her mother. The woman immediately stated that it wasn't like that. If she had met him in Vanessa's garden then, she would never see Gale again. After that, Ona added that she still does not regret her decision. However, she was very remorseful for the pain she had caused and for the long years of waiting. The emperor listened attentively to what the girl was telling him. At this moment, he shifted his gaze to the protagonist standing next to the woman. The girl just thought that she would say the emperor really loved her very much. The man asked if this girl was their Grey Houston daughter. Hearing these words, the heroine immediately said that the Mirabelle welcomed His Majesty the Emperor and dodged him. After that, he said that he didn't think this conversation was meant for children, so it would be necessary to talk to her in private. The protagonist's mother agreed to this suggestion. She then turned to her daughter and stated to Mirabelle could she please play outside for a bit. After adding that, she would get back to him soon after all. The heroine agreed and added that she would wait outside. Immediately afterward, the girl left the emperor's chamber. At the same time, thought that it seems that he treasures her mother. And it turns out, it does not look like he will do anything bad to her. Suddenly, the heroine felt someone bumping into her. Next, she looked down, and there was a boy falling. He claimed that this girl appeared as if from wherever she was from. The girl began to look closely at this boy. His hair color reminded her of something. Just then, a servant ran up to the young boy and asked if His Highness was all right. This boy, who faced the protagonist, was Prince Adrian Castro. After that, the boy asked the girl who she was, how she should be glad that he was not hurt. Though it turns out that now he even has all his clothes dirty. The heroine thought that he was so cute, but what a spoiled character he still has. Next, the girl ducked in front of the guy and greeted His Highness, saying that her name was Mirabelle. While doing so, she thought in her head that it was actually striking that he looked a lot like the emperor. The servant immediately announced to the boy that she was the granddaughter of the Grand Duke Cretan. The boy asked if his house Krypton had another child besides Elliot. The heroine apologized to His Highness for running into him, further stated that what a relief that he wasn't hurt, and asked the Axis for his permission to get out. But the boy immediately stopped her while fielding inquiries about who was there with the emperor. The heroine inquired if something was wrong with His Highness. The one, in turn, explained that the man who made the Empress cry is now in this reception room. It turns out that for her sake, he will teach him a lesson. The protagonist immediately looked intently at the child who was in front of her. At that, she thought she understood what he was feeling after all. The Emperor and his old love are outside the doors of this reception room. It seemed that the Emperor had not fully recovered yet. Of course, right now it is a nightmare for the Empress herself. Because of all this, it turns out that this boy came running here as soon as he saw the tears in his mother's eyes. The heroine knows his feelings very well. He's an attentive child and turns out to be a good son, but ends up being a little too cocky. The girl immediately told His Highness that her mom was there and she was now talking to the Emperor. The kid asked what she was saying now, but the girl remarked to him that she wanted to ask him to be more calm. After all, her mom had no intention of upsetting Her Majesty the Empress. All this dialogue was interrupted by a woman who turned to Adrian. The children immediately turned toward the woman who had spoken to him. The protagonist immediately noticed what the woman was. In front of her, let the Empress become the Empress. The woman said that she hoped that she would not find him here near the Emperor's reception room. She further approached Hadrian and informed him that he would only make life difficult for the Emperor and embarrass him. But the boy stated that he had come here because this man had upset her. And because of that, one could conclude that it was unforgivable. The mom patted her son on the head and remarked that she appreciated his feelings, but that it was not necessary. She then added that something else was actually upsetting her. Suddenly, she noticed a girl standing near her son. At this, she inquired from the dear girl who she was. The protagonist immediately ducked and introduced herself, saying that her name was Mirabelle. She added that she was the daughter of Cornelia Crichton and Gail Houston. The Empress immediately stated that she understood. At that, inquired if she must be waiting for the annoyance of the whole conversation. Further asked if she wanted to go with her, because it would be much easier to wait over tea. The heroine thought that for her, she is probably like an eyesore right now, but still not worth refusing. She accepted the offer at once. She thanked Her Majesty for everything. The three of them went to the garden to enjoy tea. The Empress noticed that the girl had her appetite, because Cornelia also liked to eat a lot of sweets. At that, she asked that she enjoy all these goodies. The heroine, with a smile on her face, immediately thanked Her Majesty for such beautiful words. The Emperor's son had been staring intently at the girl the entire time. She thought that he was literally the same as Elliot, but a little different. Also, he also keeps glaring at her as well, just like the same boy. After a while, the Empress stated that she didn't know if she heard this one from her mother, but Cornelia and her were just great friends. It was now the Empress, and could not say for sure if she still considered her a friend. The protagonist thought she was sure it was all true, and she still does. After all, probably if she saw her, she would surely remember her. While the girl was thinking about it all, her mother addressed her by name. Suddenly, the Empress raised her eyes and in front of her saw her friend Cornelia. The protagonist's mom immediately ducked down and greeted Her Majesty. After that, she remarked that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. Next, I inquired how she was doing after all, but the Empress immediately became hysterical. She started telling Cornelia that because of her, 8 years of her life had been a living hell. All because James had been waiting for her all this time. Also because he was all the woman had. Immediately afterward, she cried bitterly. She went on to say that on top of all that, she had just vanished and had not sent a single word about whether she was alive or not. In addition, she asked him if he could imagine how hurt and upset she was. Adrian listened attentively to what his mother was saying. Then he saw that she cried bitterly and immediately wanted to go over to her to help her. The protagonist immediately noticed this and stopped the boys. At the same time, she pointed out that you did not walk here and left them alone after all. At this very moment, the girl thought that you can see everything in their eyes. After all that sadness, anger, were signs that she was really bored and worried. The Empress went on with her speech that now that he would take offense that the one was alive and well, she couldn't help but feel happy. It was just an expletive for her at the moment, and she immediately ran over to hug her friend. For a while, they just stood there and quietly hugged. Then the woman added that she was so glad that Cornelia had come back to them after all. The children stood and watched intently at what had happened. The main character thought what a relief it was for both of them now. Then they all returned to the table again. But now Cornelia, the protagonist's mother, had joined them. Her Majesty remarked to her friend to just look at her hands, for they were so rough. The girl remarked that when Gale passed away, she had to take over all the manual labor. The Empress wondered, but what about the great Duke? For after all, he had always adored her. She wondered if he had not helped the girl at all. Cornelia said that she had written to him several times, but for some reason, none of the letters had reached the addressee. After she had given up on him, she just couldn't take to going home. After all this time she thought that her father still condemned her for this choice. But the interlocutor from this became even more interesting, and she asked how she was. After all, it also happens to her, did not write for some reason. But still she had to do. It is he below were friends. The mother of the protagonist remarked that it would be simply impudent of her. Her Majesty added that she probably should have thought more about her friend. The heroine listens to their conversations and realized why her mother and the Empress had been such good friends all along. How come Empress Marianne had been secretly in love with the Emperor for a long time? The very day she decided to give him up, her mom ran away with her father. By doing so, she abandoned the Emperor and annulled her engagement to him. Fortunately, Marianne was able to take her place and become engaged to the Emperor, whom she had long loved. However, Emperor Castro continued to wait for the heroine's mother all this time. Because of this, they concluded the marriage only 2 years after their engagement. Because of all this, it turned out that her love for Emperor Castro and her concern for her friend, as well as the resentment she felt, turned into a mixture of terrible misfortunes. All of this was happening until Prince Adrian was born. The heroine knew that at least the prince was a good son, for he was sticking up for his mother. At the same time, the heroine was confused by the fact that this man was again staring at her constantly. The heroine asked the boy if there was something wrong with her. Adrian remarked, "Does she not like all those cookies that are on the table?" The heroine, because of this, said that she likes them, but still, they are too sweet for her. The boy was quite surprised by such words, and he thought, who does not like sweets after all? The girl added that after all she had said that she did not mind sweet things. It just did not matter now. At the same time, you thought that this boy is still a child. After all this meal, the protagonist along with her mother were about to leave. They were escorted out by the Empress along with her son. The woman announced her friend to come to the royal castle whenever she wanted, and she would make her favorite tea. Cornelia said she would definitely come, but asked that the woman there not hold it against her for coming too often. The Empress remarked with a smile on her face that of course she would not. At that she waved goodbye and said that it was time for them to say goodbye, and he hoped that he would not see Mirabelle anytime soon. The heroine from these words immediately thanked Her Majesty, also stated that it had been quite a pleasure for her to meet them. Suddenly, the girl shifted her eyes to Adrian, who was standing near his mom. The boy tried to raise his hand to say goodbye to the girl. Still, he didn't, and stopped short. The heroine's mom turned to her as a matter of fact, urging her to walk towards the carriage. "You what?" The girl declared that she would not do so now, and they left. Immediately afterward, the carriage headed towards their estate. The heroine sat and reflected that her mother's health was improving after all. The meeting with the Emperor had gone better than she had expected. Now she needs to gather evidence on Daniel and find out about all his affairs. While the girl was thinking about it all, her mother noticed it and asked what she was thinking about. The heroine immediately stated that she wanted to ask her about something. She was rather curious if there was someone else in the Grand Duke Crichton's family that she hadn't met before. Her mother stated with a smile that there is all sorts of someone else. This person is a great uncle to the girl, as well as the younger brother of Danielle Crichton's father. The girl realized, from the look on his face, that there was little suspicion of Danielle intercepting letters. Now she was content to wonder how to prove it to everyone. While the girl was thinking then, her mother turned to her. She asked Mirabelle if he could ask her for a favor. The heroine of this also asked her what kind of favor she was talking about. Cornelia inquired if her daughter could call Duke Crichton her grandfather. After all, He is her grandfather. Though he doesn't show it, the woman is sure that he really wants her to call him that. The protagonist thinks that although it's not awkward enough, she's right. Because he's her mom's mom, her dad, and her grandfather, but she's doing it for her mom. The girl further stated about her mom that she would give it a try. Cornelia immediately thanked her and stated that she hoped to get used to all of this quickly. After a while, the girls finally arrived at their estate. They were met by the Grand Duke and asked if they had finally met the Emperor. Cornelia informed her father that they had met and everything had gone well enough. The man began to descend from the second floor and wondered how His Majesty was doing and what they had talked about. The daughter reported that they talked about what had happened in the past and how they felt then. Also, His Majesty had been understanding about it all, and her father should not worry about it. Her father exhaled with relief and stated that thank goodness. After all, he would finally be able to relax and not worry. Next, the heroine's mom went on to say that last year, Uncle Daniel promised to return. She is sure that they will be able to rest for a while until then. The man remarked that this was all true and she should go upstairs and get some rest. Suddenly, the heroine turned to her mother and the Grand Duke, calling him grandfather. She noticed that she wanted to tell her grandfather something and asked her mom to go upstairs without her. The grandfather from such words got very much excited. He declared to his daughter that after all he would send Mirabelle to her soon, and that she should go and rest. After all, he was still very curious to know what was the matter. The mother remarked to her daughter that she would then wait for her upstairs, and the girl agreed. After that, they retired to the Duke's reception room. The man offered to drink tea to his granddaughter. The most important character sat at this moment and thought that this was the same reception room in which she died. The Grand Duke, because of this, inquired what she wanted to tell after all. The girl began to talk about whether her grandfather remembered what she had said about the letters her mother had sent. He replied that he remembered, for she said that his daughter Cornelia's apology was written there. The heroine went on to say that her mom sent at least 2 letters a week. From this it appears that she sent some of them through the Merchants Guild and some of them through mercenaries. If you do the math, there must have been at least 20 a year. The fact that not a single letter had ever reached the man was suspicious. She further wondered if he was unlikely to believe it now, even if she said his own brother had intercepted all those letters. All she had to do now was arouse suspicion. Still, she continued to worry about it. She further stated that she was a little afraid that these letters might have gotten lost because someone disliked her and her mom a lot. Now she wondered if it was fear or no. It was disgust for that person after all. It was all because of Daniel Crichton. Because of him, her mother had died of a curable disease. Then the girl had to bury her in the ground with her own hands. Because of all this, she was hurt even more. The protagonist then had to keep her beloved mom buried under the cold, dark dirt. Now she thought it would never happen again, and she just wouldn't let it happen. The Duke stated that really it was strange after all. After all, so many letters had been lost. However, he added that there was nothing to worry about. No one in this mansion wishes no harm to the girl or her mother. The heroine thought that there was no point in telling her stories from the future. She stated that she needed to get to the bottom of the situation, and she would like to ask the man to do so as his granddaughter. She further quipped and thanked him for listening. The man remarked that all ice was willing to do so and asked that she go and get some rest. The girl left and thought that there was no need to rush. After all, it had only been a day since they had arrived at the mansion. If you think about it that way, Brian is also as unsuspecting of Daniel as the Grand Duke.